The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 5th chapter. Glory to you, Lord. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give him your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." The Gospel of the Lord. So I was one of those really disgusting kids in school that pretty much was good at everything, at least academically. I made A's in virtually everything, whether it was history, science, math, later theology. I got A's, or occasionally a B, but I was really good at pretty much everything, and I was also disgusting because half the time I didn't really have to study very hard to get those grades. And it went on like that till the middle of college, and linear algebra happened. And I thought, linear algebra, how hard could that be? I took algebra in high school. I made A's. I took calculus in college. I made A's. How hard could linear algebra be? And yet as the class went on, week after week, it got harder and harder. I struggled more and more with it. It never really came together, and I probably remember taking that class because it was the only class in college I ever took where I got a C. And I was happy to be done with it and just have the whole thing over. And I probably remember that experience because as I reflected on it, I thought, you know, the problem wasn't really the math. The math technically was relatively simple. I should have been able to grasp the math. My problem was I never figured out what the point of linear algebra was. I could never figure out why we were doing what we were doing, and so I would go to class week after week, and the graduate assistant who was teaching the class would say, oh, you know, we take this equation, we add to this equation, we end up with this equation, right? I'm like, yeah, I think so. And I mean, I could do the math. But what was the point? Why should I bother with this? What was the whole meaning behind the thing? I never grasped that. And you know what? Those are important questions that we often happen to have in life. What's the point? Why does this matter? Why should I pay attention? The difference is, most of those questions don't go away after a semester, like linear algebra did. And I bring this up because we've been reading Jesus' Sermon on the Mount for the last several weeks as our gospel readings. And one of the ways to understand Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is to see it as a running commentary on many of the laws, the statutes, the ordinances that we find in the Old Testament. Jesus uses the Sermon on the Mount to be able to lift up some of these rules as important and valuable to his hearers. Yet when Jesus does that, he doesn't simply say, well, here it is, remember to do it, and be done with it. Instead, he talks about them in ways that help folks to understand the point. Why is this important? Why should it make a difference in my life? Why does God say this stuff anyway? The rules for Jesus are more than simply a math equation where you're just supposed to work out the problem and be done with it. Instead, he wants people to understand the point of the rules. And you start to understand the point when you realize that most of the rules in the Old Testament and most of the rules that Jesus comments on are not rules about how you're supposed to relate to God. They're rules about how we live with one another, how we relate to one another, how we live with one another. It's a point we point out to the confirmation class, as we're doing right now in studying the Ten Commandments, that when God gives the Ten Commandments, the commandments, at least as we count them, 3 of them are about our relationship with God and the things we're supposed to do to live in harmony and peace with God. 7 of them are about how we're supposed to live with one another. And we might not realize this, but that is a radical departure, or was a radical departure from most of the ancient religions in the world. For most of the ancient religions, the gods really cared deeply about whether you served the god, and you did the things that the god wanted to honor and serve the god. And if you did those things to serve God, then the god was happy with you, and life would be good. And if you did not serve the god, then your crops would die, and so would you. But if you kind of mistreated your neighbor, that was kind of beside the point. Most of the ancient gods really could care less. But not the God of Israel. The God of Israel did care about how you treated your neighbor, and most of Jesus' commentary on the rules are focused on the rules regarding how we live with one another. And he comments and he expands on the rules so that we understand the point. Because if we don't understand the point, we're never really going to be able to understand the rules, just like I was never able to really understand linear algebra. So what's the point for Jesus? It's clear in the Sermon on the Mount that the point of all of these rules is to help us create and maintain healthy and viable communities with one another. God wants his love for us to be reflected in our dealings with one another. And so Jesus works in the Sermon on the Mount to show us the point of the rules, and often the point is to have humility and to remember that you are not God, even when you're absolutely certain that your neighbor is bad and your neighbor is wrong. So when Jesus goes on and he says stuff that clearly made people go, huh, what? Turn the other cheek when somebody smacks you. If somebody wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. Somebody forces you to go a mile, go the second mile. Why? Well, the point is not that we should enjoy being masochists and being beat up and taken advantage of. The idea is that when those things happen to you or to me, it makes us really mad. It makes us uncomfortable. It makes me want to get even. And I want to get vengeance on that person for doing that to me or somebody I love. And the point of Jesus' commentary here is to say, you know what? Even if somebody's wrong, even if somebody's bad, just remember in your dealings with that person, you're not God. You don't get to stand in the place of God with that person. And vengeance or paybacks, if they get doled out at all, are, as our first reading reminds us, God's job, not yours. And part of the way, part of the point of the rules is always to have us, when we're dealing with one another, keep that sense of humility and remember that we don't get to be God over our neighbors. That's part of the point of the rules. Part of the point of the rules is that we're supposed to be agents of creating and strengthening healthy community with one another, even and especially with people that we don't like and we don't agree with. Because if God makes his sun rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous, then the point is that even the evil and the unrighteous are objects of God's care and concern. And even as God doesn't simply dismiss those people as worthless or ignore them, that's something that we can't do either. That's part of the point. Not to simply hope that someday all the people that I disagree with will go away and it will only be people that I love and care for, because Jesus says, you know, if all you're doing is being nice to people who are nice to you, how is that different from anyone? Part of the point is to remember that we're the ones who are supposed to be agents of creating that healthy community. And I think also part of the point that Jesus lifts up in these rules is to be open to constantly wrestling with God for answers in life, instead of simply looking for some verse that we like, some rule that we like, lifting it up and saying, here it is, I got the answer. Because I know a lot of people that like to do that. I like to pull out a verse sometimes and go, here it is, here's the rule, God said it. And of course, when I do that, it's a rule that I'm easily following, but you may not be. So therefore, here it is, I'm done, and that's all God has to say about it. That's never all God has to say about it. And Jesus ends this section of the Sermon on the Mount with these words, "Be perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect." I sit there and go, I can't be perfect. You can't be perfect. So what's the point? The point is that if perfection is the goal that we're never going to actually get to, then the only way to even make progress on that is to be in constant engagement with God, who is perfect. To constantly wrestle with the questions of life, rather than simply deciding that somehow or other we have arrived at the perfect answers. Those are the points of the rules, at least as Jesus is lifting them up in the Sermon on the Mount. And at a time when so many people in our country and in our world are divided and angry and fearful, I'm not sure that insisting that we've got the right rules or the right set of rules is either helpful or faithful. That is, instead of picking a few rules out from our faith tradition and saying, here it is, folks, everybody better follow these rules. Instead, I wonder if what God really wants and needs from us at this point in time in our lives is to lift up the point of the rules, to be the community that says, what are the rules supposed to be about anyway, rather than simply fighting over the individual proposals. Because after all, that's what Jesus did, I think. He showed people that the point of God's rules was helping people to live in the kind of peace, love, and justice that reflects God's action in our own lives, reflects God's character. So perhaps what Jesus called to us is, at this particular moment in time, is to consider that maybe we're called to be the people who lift up the point of the rules by being folks who reflect humility in our discussions with others. A kind of humility that shows genuine respect for others, even others who we are absolutely convinced are wrong, instead of simply trying to show others how stupid they are, which is frankly lately seeming to be the point of Facebook. You know, people are great to tell people how, on the other side of the political spectrum, how dumb they are and how bad they are, but maybe what makes us different, what's supposed to make us different, what's supposed to give light and salt to the world, is when we can be folks who actually model a kind of humility that says, you know what, I don't have all the answers, you don't either, but maybe what we're supposed to do is change the way the discussion happens. And maybe that's what Jesus needs us to do, is to be people that help change the way that discussion happens by actually modeling some of that humility. Maybe what Jesus is calling us to do right now is to lift up the point of the rules by being people who actually ask that question. What's the point of these rules? If what we're trying to do is actually build and strengthen healthy community for ourselves and for others, how do we help that happen? Most people of other faiths, people of no faith at all, will get on board with that idea. And we're all going to probably disagree, and even among ourselves, how we exactly pull that off. But if that's the point, then maybe the way that we're called to be light and salt for the world is that we are going to be people who change the discussion, provide that extra element that's not there by asking, what's the point of these various proposals for what the rules ought to be? And I think also, maybe what Jesus needs for us is to be people who lift up the point of the rules by being folks who continue to wrestle daily with God. Through prayer and through study, through discussion with one another, not because we finally think that if we ask the right questions and spend a couple of hours on it, we'll come up with the perfect solutions. But because somehow or other, we recognize it and we can show to others that in the midst of a world filled with human imperfection, there is actually a God in whom we trust, who really is perfect, and who transcends all of the other stuff that's going on in our world, and who finally has the last word. If we can model that, if we can show that, maybe that's part of what's missing in the discussions in so much of our world today. In the end, I don't think that it's enough just to remember the rules and follow them, and I think that's not what Jesus said. Instead, I think Jesus calls us to remember the point of the rules. For it's in remembering and living the point of the rules that we bear witness to God's goodness and God's grace in our lives. It's in remembering and living the point of the rules that we can act with humility and compassion. And it's in remembering and living the point of the rules that we remember that our call is to constantly rely on God's perfection instead of on our own.